Welcome to the Gods of Tomorrow podcast, where we discuss religious deconstruction, secular humanism, political activism, and epistemology. Together, we explore how to solve human problems with human solutions. We deconstruct, we activate, and then most importantly, we live our fucking lives. I am your host, Josh Raw, and you are the Gods of Tomorrow. All right. Let's do this shit. Welcome back, free thinkers. This is the Gods of Tomorrow podcast. I am Josh Raw. You can call me Josh, and this is episode 25. It has been an interesting week in the world of politics for those who have been paying attention to this. We have seen the Supreme Court now in just full motion. They've now had a 6-3 vote where they've struck down affirmative action, they've struck down queer rights, and they've struck down student debt forgiveness. This is the same Supreme Court, of course, that struck down the right to abortion federally last year at the same vote of a 6-3. So just my really quick pitch here to make sure that you are being involved in the political realm, whether it's in your local politics, your state politics, or contacting your Congress, because Congress is the group of individuals that keep those checks and balances with the Supreme Court. So make sure you're voting the right folks in there that are advocating for your rights so that they can pass the laws that you want to have passed. So with that out of the way, I do want to go ahead and step in to today's episode. We are bringing another guest onto our episode to interview. You may be familiar with him as being Chaotic Dad on TikTok. His name is Daniel. Chaotic Dad, is so good to see you. I have people talk about you all the time in my Discords, and you need to bring him on the podcast. You need to talk to him. He's got the same energy as you do. So here you are. Let's see if we can make their dreams come true. How are you doing today?
I'm good. You caught me off guard when you reached out to me the other day saying that people were talking about me on your Discords. I was like, I started all this just to find a few people that went through some stuff I did, and now here I am, people talking about us and having a whole crew called the Chaotic Crew and everything. So it's been a wild journey.
That is amazing. How long have you been on TikTok now? Has that been your primary platform for talking about religious deconstruction?
Yeah. For now, I've had the TikTok account for a while because that's what we all did during COVID to survive.
Yeah.
But, and I did some little jokey videos before, but not until about January, I think 3rd or 4th, somewhere around there, I posted kind of my first video because I finally decided to kind of start telling my story. Mm-hmm. Because I knew that during my deconstruction, I felt alone. And so that's when I started. And I know some people paid for followers to get to their 1,000 mark to go live. I kind of grew it organically, and so it took about a month or two before I could actually go live. So I think I've only been live for, I guess that'd be 4 months.
Oh,
give
really?
Or take.
And you're doing fucking marathon runs going live too. I wake up every morning and it's like, God, Daniel's already awake live again, and then I get on in the evening, it's like, and he's still going.
Oh God! Well, evening we've kind of switched it up where I have another friend of mine running my, I call it my ESPN2 channel, Chaotic After Dark. So he's a great guy too. Eric is a fantastic man, and he's been through a lot himself and does some great work. He enjoys the heavier debate style. We kind of allow for the two different. We have two different kind of channels for two different approaches, but still both with respect. Yeah.
I definitely know that you've been one of the primary faces on my FYP lately. I've seen a lot of new agnostic atheists kind of stepping into that zone and trying to build healthy communities for those that are deconstructing and deconverting to just find their way through the chaos that is trying to get your mind wrapped around new concepts and to try to kind of face those existential crises that we all went through. How many years has it been now that you'd say you have deconstructed?
So I refer to it as ish time, because I was in the faith for 30-ish years and out kind of deconstructed for 10-ish, because you have that little ish time where you're you're pretty sure you're kind of out, but then something will happen and you'll start to say a prayer or something, or you'll sing a hymn in your head or whatever. You have those little triggers that you still kind of fall back on. So I'd say 10-ish years is where I've gotten to now, where I would think I'm actually healed.
Yeah. I really appreciate that affirmation. Just in regards to, that's a message I continuously give with my own group, is that it's not an overnight process. It's not like you wake up one day and go, man, I want to go out there and sin today. I'm not going to believe in God anymore. It's really a process of breaking down like layer after layer of information that's embedded in your head. And even when you think you finally crawled away, something creeps up and you go, why do I think like that? Why is that my process? Go ahead.
So the analogy I typically give to people about that, and I don't know if you've been on the live when I've given this, is it's like a tree that has grown out of you, like that belief system. Whether you're going from atheism to Christianity or Christianity out to atheism or any other kind of thing, you have this belief system that has grown out of you, this tree, and the longer you've held it, the larger that tree is, and the deeper those roots are. Mm-hmm. So when it comes time to kind of you're trying to you realize that tree is not healthy for you, that it's not what it is you believe. Mm-hmm. You're ripping that out, and it's bringing a lot of who you are with it, mm-hmm. and just leaving this giant hole. Now, if you're someone who has kind of ripped it out because you had a bad event, sometimes when you pull a tree out faster, it brings more with it.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And so then the process after that is figuring out what kind of soil to fill back in there, what to fill that hole back in, and to plant a new belief or personal view system that will then grow into a new tree. And that process takes a lot of time and is dependent on how deep those roots were of community, of belief, of experience, of everything.
And I know if folks go through this process in a way that I did, and maybe you did as well, is that you are oftentimes finding topsoil to throw back into that hole, and you're having to dig it back out again and find something else because it just doesn't resonate right. And oftentimes we search for truth in places that we can't find it.
Yeah, you end up tossing in sand or something instead of some good topsoil, or it's just. But that's part of the process. That's part of, I guess, gardening in a sense. Is finding the right combinations of landscape that goes together, but just really, but that hole that is left when you start to rebuild is such a hard thing to get past and hard thing to figure out how to fill back in, which is why, like you and I, we have our platforms. I feel like we're those people that can be like, okay, here's how to better fill in that hole, as opposed to just trial and error. You know what I mean? Because I didn't have that. Mm-hmm. I've told people I didn't know all the famous atheist people that people talk about.
Yeah.
I did not have access to that, so I came about my beliefs organically on my own, and learning things along the way. I didn't until after the fact learn about Dawkins and everybody else who people talk about, and I can't even remember their names. That's how little I know about them. So it baffles people when they realize, like, oh wait, he did this on his own. So
yeah, which is a long, arduous journey. I knew some of the names when I was deconstructing, but they were so shamed in my church that I didn't even go and seek them. Like I went other directions. I went to other churches. I went to other denominations. I even went to other faiths, that didn't necessarily align with mine, in just hopes of finding truth there, because I couldn't find it where I was.
Right.
And I knew that the Abrahamic God was still, the being that was worshipped there. I was like, well, I maybe that's where the truth is at. And so it ended up being a lot of hoops I was jumping through. I'd like to take just a little bit of a step, though, into a direction of seeing when your seed was planted for that tree to grow and take root, which was at a very young age. You said that you were a missionary, I know, but you were kind of in Christianity for 30 years. So let's get into it.
Okay. Yeah. So oftentimes I get this a lot, is I'll say missionary, and the first thing people think of is like Mormon. And they're like, oh yeah, where did they spend the 2 years missions? Nope. We've done more than that. My parents were missionaries in Guatemala for 45 years.
Oh, wow.
And so I was born and raised there. I have to tell the Latinos I was just undercooked. So they're always like, "No, you're not from there." I'm like, "Yeah, got the birth certificate and all, but yeah, just wasn't cooked long enough." Um, yeah, I was born and raised there. I was helping translate for mission teams that came down. I was age like the earliest I can remember is like 7 or 8 that I was translating for teams, and so I was part of the mission about as much as they were. I was baptized at age 10. I was, and I have to always kind of give this a disclaimer because everybody says, we attack Christians and stuff. My parents, they were the type, if I were to go back to the faith, they would be the ones I model it after. They were the ones that were showing the love, were showing like care and stuff before preaching, before sharing that sort of stuff. They showed that they, were there for the people. So I can't knock them for that.
Yeah.
Even if some of it might be misguided, it just, I can't knock them for that. But they did give me the chance to think for myself, which I guess now backfired on them a little.
Well, I do have to just interject quickly. I say this all the time in regards to individuals who identify as Christian, because I know a lot of great Christians in my own life. And even when I think back on my church, I enjoyed fellowship with those individuals. They were kind, they were loving, they did show, the traits that we would think of as being Christ-like in the church.
Right.
There were elements that I didn't necessarily appreciate, but it was the theology for me that I eventually broke down. It wasn't the people. The people were kind and caring. They weren't the hateful individuals that I see sometimes coming in my comments on social media when I'm sharing things. And when I think of parents specifically, I love how you phrased it, because I think of parents as always doing the best with what they have and the best with what they know. And you can't fault them for doing the best with what they thought was right at the time. It's not a thing to come back and attack them with.
Well, that's the thing we have to remember while we do these platforms too, is I have to remind my crew all the time. Like, because the first reaction when a Christian comes in to preach at us or whatever is to lash back out at them. I have to remind them that, hey, many of us were those people. And they deserve a little empathy as well to understand that, hey, they may not know any better from what they're doing. And so I have to remind myself, because otherwise, what's the point? Like, I can't think that all Christians are dumb, because I was one at one point. I can't think all Christians are hateful and horrible. I was one at one point. And that's where we oftentimes lose the empathy. And I understand it from a lot of people, especially many atheists who we have in my chaotic crew that have been, that's it. Am I allowed to, I guess, say? I'm so busy talking in TikTok language that we're on podcasts. I guess I can say sexual assault. They've been sexually assaulted. They've been abused. They've been kicked out simply for having a different belief or for being who they are. And so I have to be sensitive to that, but I also have to recognize that, so that's why I understand their fight back.
Yeah, and I get it too. And I have to be honest, I have times where I slip back and I'm more sardonic and I lash out and I'm not as respectful as I should be, because I am human and I have the capacity to go in either direction. But I agree with that sentiment. I think that it takes all of us, atheists and theists alike, to be able to come to a table and have a conversation to build a better society. And if we can't meet them with the grace that they are asking for, then we're not going to be able to have those conversations.
Right. It's tough. I mean, but that's also I guess part of my journey was being that I was able to come up into it naturally and have the experiences I've got. I'm able to kind of bridge that gap that many can't, and be able to relate to both sides in a sense, and not have the instant reaction. The times I get more upset is when I see the hypocrisy that when I was a Christian I would have recognized as well. The things that as a Christian would have triggered me watching other Christians do. The ones that attack us and then say, well, we were told to come with a sword. Like, that was like one verse maybe, and that's even, I don't think it was literal.
Yeah.
Come on. got the golden rule too, apparently. The hypocrisy piece is the one that typically triggers me the most. When I can look at it from the Christian view and be like, that's not even right.
Yeah.
So that's that. Yeah. But I guess so from there, from my parents allowing me to learn and believe, they wanted me to have an authentic belief. So for the time that I was still there, I went to Christian school. We did church. I don't know how many times a week because they were church planners. So in the villages and name it, we were all over the place. But I studied with the intent, with the eyes of apologetics, to actually prove God right. I did missions on my own when I was 16. Saw what I thought was a demon possession and exorcism. Saw what experienced what I thought was a healing on myself, only to kind of be able to deconstruct that later on and recognize it seemed like a more natural thing than anything. But in those moments, I was primed to accept it because that's what I had been taught. And so at the moment I accepted it. As I got older, studied more, my ex-wife now, during the time, she was an ordained Baptist woman, which I know seems like an oxymoron in and of itself, but she is. She's more progressive. But it's when I became a father where it started to really break down. Even though that I was doing the mental gymnastics to justify things, to keep myself in it, I was one of the people that everybody looked up to as a leader, an example of who to be as a Christian, all that stuff. As I became a father and recognizing what my responsibility was, bringing life into the world, and how that looked, it no longer lined up with the biblical God, with this, God our Father figure that is supposed to be loving and caring and stuff. And that's when it really started to break down. And the more and longer I was a father, the less it made sense.
Can you go into that a little bit more and talk about what specific things didn't align that you were seeing in the Bible with your role as being a father of your own children?
Right. So that's the other analogy I challenge Christians with is, so I bring life into the world, and I have 2 kids. And as anybody with kids knows, these kids learn differently. They act different. So I get it. We all are going to look at things in a different way. But if I were to be an all-loving, powerful God that knows my kids, knows what they're going to do and everything, I have 2 primary responsibilities. One is to educate them on what I expect of them, what the world expects of them, and how they should go about their life. And so when I look at that piece alone, and then look at how we have 45,000 different denominations, or even extremely brilliant people who are atheists and looking at this and being like, this doesn't make sense. That does not sound like a clear message to me. It doesn't sound like it really is truly reaching who it wants. And if I, as a father who love them dearly, want them to know I love them, I need to be clear on my instructions. Don't give one the clear instructions of the Bible. Give the other one like Buddhism, Hindu, Islam, something else, and confuse them, or nothing at all, and expect them to get to the same place. So as a father, number one, I should be able to educate them clearly. The message should be clear. The second thing is making sure that they know my presence and that I love them. Not this, well, I feel he's here. Not this, I think he loves me. I think I get this message. I get this warm, fuzzy feeling, but actually no. Because for those 30 years, I thought I knew, but never really knew. It's almost as if he went out for milk and never came back. So that's the fun part. I by the time they've grown and they're ready to go out on their own, they shouldn't have my message and education clear. They should know 100% that I am there for them and I love them. And then the last thing is the more I compare it to the Bible, when it's time for them to come home, I could make 2 identical heavens. The only difference is I'm in one, not the other. And then when they come back, if they choose me, I know it's authentic. I know it's real. They're not choosing me because I set the other house on fire. If they choose the other one, that's fine. I'll be disappointed. But they didn't choose to be brought into this world. I brought them into this world. I'll be disappointed, but I would support them on their choice. That's what they want. That's what makes them happy. That's what I think a real father would do. I'll be elated if they come back to me. But if they, for some reason, chose over there, maybe the question is, where did I go wrong in showing them love and educating them? Where did, like, as opposed to, well, they just didn't listen properly, or they didn't read enough, or they didn't fast enough, or they didn't, like, let's victim blame. Okay. So that's the general thing that over time as a father, that's where it really broke down for me, is it just didn't make sense that this all powerful being would bring us all in and then toy with us the way it feels like.
Yeah, without being present and having that real connection with them. It's interesting that was like a start to your deconstruction, because it was the same for me. I had children, and that's where my deconstruction kind of started out. And it had a lot to do with, at the time, I was heavily studying behavioral science and behaviorism, and just, working with mice in labs and animals, and also as a behavior specialist, I was writing treatment plans for individuals, and there is certain elements that you would put into place to help shape behavior for animals or even people to behave or act in a certain way. And I started making those correlations between what was happening in the church and Sunday schools and worship services, and shaping people's behavior to think a certain way. And I got to this place that I was like, I'm not raising my children with free will of being authentic to make a choice. I'm wrapping them up into a system that is defining what reality is for them, and what this system looks like, and how to think and how to behave and how to believe, without giving them any opportunity to think about it freely. And that was like, this doesn't seem very fatherly. This seems like I'm making robots.
Pretty much. I mean, I then changed my approach on how I raise the kids with our kids. I'm not gonna lie, I had fun with the Santa Claus Tooth Fairy stuff. I'm that dad. I took it's not confetti, like I took things that sparkled and made it a path from the window to their bed for the Tooth Fairy. We had all sorts of stuff. I've made things magical, but as they grew up, every time they would ask, hey, is Santa Claus real? Is the Tooth Fairy real? I never once said yes. I always said, well, what do you think? It's like, what's the evidence around you? And so as a little kid, obviously everything around you tells you it's real.
Yeah.
And so as they're little, they're like, oh, well, for now, I believe it. As they get older, they start going, okay, well, the window wasn't open, and they start questioning, but I always would be like, well, what do you think? And then they'd tell me, and I'd say, oh, well, evaluate that, think about it. And if you believe it, cool. And it's a very subtle way to teach them that critical thinking.
Yeah.
And then they can apply that to whether it be religion, what people think about the vaccine or whatever, like anything. It can then apply to anything.
Yeah. I love that. All right. So you became a young father. You started your deconstruction. You started asking questions. What was the point that you started stepping, I guess, outside of the faith and decided that, I'm not going to bring my kids in the church anymore, or I'm going to stop attending, or I need to look into some of these things a bit deeper?
I mean, I was still attending even when I think I had kind of decided to pull away. I was in a very progressive church at the time, before moving to Atlanta, and was still married to her at that time. And so I still had a hard time letting go of that community, which is one of the hardest things out of everything. The community piece to me is one of the hardest things to pull away from, because that's something tangible, of course. Pulling away from something that's kind of mystical to me isn't quite as hard as actually ripping out your whole community. But they were all supportive on asking challenging questions and everything like that. So to me, it became more of an intellectual, like academic approach at that time.
Oh, wow.
But my kids still would attend with my wife. I would still sometimes go just to go. However, then, shortly after that, for other reasons, not for religious reasons, my wife and I got divorced. And then, but we moved to Atlanta still together. And I mean, from there, I stopped going on my own because I was like, I wasn't tethered to that. But worked with her on letting her take the kids. And as long as they were going to more progressive churches, I was okay if they were. But being that she was a Baptist ordained woman, I figured I would be progressive enough.
There's a lot of truth in that. I really appreciate your focus on communities. I know we talked about this a little bit the other day, right. Just about the importance of that, because it is true that those that are outside of the Christian community have a hard time finding community. And it is a very concrete, real thing that exists that really benefits an individual in terms of their mental health, their overall happiness, because we're biopsychosocial creatures. Like, we have to have right. that connection to other people to feel like we have some fulfillment, like we have that sense of belonging that's taking place. And Christianity has done well in establishing a patterned type of engagement between its followers, to be around people that are like-minded, that share common beliefs, to feel supported, to be able to reach out when they need help. And those that don't engage in those systems have a hard time finding a place to go to outside of that.
Right, and the Bible Belt potlucks are always nice too.
They are, yeah.
I mean, the good old potluck dinners at church and whatnot, those are always nice.
Now, I do want to ask you a more challenging question in regards to when you stopped going to the church and stopped engaging with it. Did they try to have an intervention? Did they come and contact at your house, make phone calls, try to bring you back into the church? Were they concerned about Daniel and him falling away? He's the chosen child, a missionary from childhood that's here to do the work of God, and now he's not showing up and he's got a divorce, and Satan's in his life and he's pulling him away.
Not really, because it was an amicable divorce. It was a case where we were literally opposites attract. All the personality tests with the letters and Myers-Briggs and stuff, ISTP, all that stuff, our letters were always opposite. So we were the epitome of opposites attract. And that can go one of two ways. It can be a wonderful thing where you fill in each other's gaps some, and so when it's working great, it works great. When it's not,
it's volatile.
It's always very volatile. Yes. And just over time we just discovered we weren't really good together. And for the health of the kids, we separated. But
even beyond that, because you're falling away from grace.
Right. But because of that, that piece helped on the front of the divorce, where a lot of people understood. And again, we were part of a more progressive community, so that piece wasn't as big a deal. My parents weren't as happy. They were, Southern Baptists. They weren't. They were more concerned about it. They didn't fight me on it. They didn't quite understand me falling away religiously. They thought that maybe it was because of the more progressive views that those churches had of it. But the worst that really came of it, and I don't even see it as the worst. My mom would reach out to me and ask me questions, but to me, that was just an opportunity to have conversations. Coming from the missionary life, obviously, when I graduated high school, we all just kind of dispersed everywhere. So we went to an American school so that we could then go to college here in the States. But the problem with that is that when you graduate and you've got missionaries coming from California, Texas, everywhere else, you disperse. And I ended up choosing a school where no other missionary kid I knew was there, and nobody else that I knew was there. So I was kind of starting over. And like I said, it was a more progressive group there, so it wasn't as big a deal. But yeah, no intervention. Now I'm not gonna lie, we have a family reunion coming up not too long from now, and I hope they try an intervention because I'm in a much better place now, and I would enjoy the challenge. But no, for the most part, no intervention.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I had a couple when I stepped away from the church, but they weren't that intense. I had a couple of youth pastors bring me back in and take me to breakfast and try to convince me to come back again, but that was about the extent of it. Um, my
Do you
wife's
all,
deconstruction wasn't as great. Like she had
oh
stalkers, people
goodness.
coming and knocking on the door, coming into her
Oh my
house, trying
gosh.
to get her on medication, doing prayer circles outside her house, a
Oh.
whole number of things.
Casting out the demons.
Yeah.
Yes, I feel you. Well, and maybe it's because my brother did. He was the prodigal son.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that went out at one point during college and like left the family and disappeared for a while. Did whatever. Now he's back and stronger than ever and doing some wonderful work in Guatemala now. He stayed down there, but he is the epitome of the prodigal son. And so I don't know if they're thinking that, oh well, it's just a matter of time before Daniel comes back
Mm-hmm.
or what. Um, I don't know. Maybe that's why they didn't come after me because they've already been, trained that they'll just, let go and let God. I don't know. So
I in coming back to this, and this may give a little bit of insight and help for folks that are going through the same process. We talked about this allegory of the tree and filling the hole back in with information. You went through your deconstruction. You dug out all this stuff out of the hole, which is a very painful, tedious process for we'll say
right,
10 years, and eventually you had to fill that back in. I'm specifically particularly interested in your experience because I was not as embedded into Christianity. In fact, many probably weren't as being a missionary kid, where you literally had this concept of God and Jesus attached to your identity very early on
right.
into life and had this connection with it. And you had to somehow dissect that, separate it, and find yourself again. What was that process like in figuring out who Daniel is without God being the guiding compass?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I have also been, I guess, uh, it's hard to use the terms now because blessed or
Mm-hmm.
born with, developed as a very logical mind with a little, sprinkle of art, artistic touch in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just a slow breakdown of things along the way between the studies and going, wait, this doesn't line up with this. But then also my base empathy that I feel like my son is very empathetic. He seems to be born with more empathy than some of my other kids. Um, and that's something I feel like I've always had. And so it became an easier process the more I traveled, the more I was exposed to other cultures, even when I was in the faith. And so when it came time to kind of pull away and let go, it was easier to kind of let go of some of the beliefs
Mm-hmm.
because I could then look at things more rationally as I learned more about science,
Mm-hmm.
like the healing experience, thinking I got healed when if I really look at it, the idea of a bunch of people surrounding me and praying for me makes me feel warm and fuzzy. You got serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline, things that kind of pump through your body. And each little time that I was able to like recreate that feeling, like while playing recreational sports,
Mm-hmm.
having a group of people cheering for you and you're like limping, but you push through and finish the game and you feel like it's not hurting. And yeah, so when those smaller pieces, those smaller steps where was honest with myself,
Mm-hmm.
I would be like, okay, it's this little fuzzy feeling, a Holy Spirit or a chemical reaction.
Yeah.
And and every every part of the deconstruction is just a one step at a time sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I had those moments, I'd be like, okay, can I recreate this on my own?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer was yes, then it completely invalidates like what happened in my past.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had to accept it. So then you do that with one, you get to the next thing that you previously didn't make sense to you, but you just attribute it to God. Evaluate that. I'm able to recreate it, or if there's other explanations for it, it doesn't make sense for it to be supernatural. And
Mm-hmm.
so, for me, I'm grateful I was a little more logical and being able to separate some stuff. And then the experiences I've had from our loss of our niece because of childhood cancer, the loss of my son because of trisomy 18, and stuff like that, is each one helps kind of push a little further.
Mm-hmm.
Each one, when you look back in retrospect, helps start filling those things in. But my steps were basically just being honest with myself with each thing and being able to compare my life experiences with what I was taught and how they just did not add up, and accepting it. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of steps. Yeah, depending on which topic it is, there's a lot of different steps as far as how to do that. But in the end, it had to do with just more, instead of focusing externally on something that I can't control, some being that none of us really know all the answers to, and accepting that piece that I have to just worry about myself first. That helped me with each of the other steps.
Yeah, instead of taking a complex problem and making it more complex, you start looking at how you can break it down to find the simplistic pieces
Right.
that make it complex to begin with.
Or even allowing myself to give myself an out because there might be another being, like not taking responsibility for something, which is what you said a minute ago. As far as, some people think we just left so we can sin more.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I was doing more sin when I was in the church than I am now, because it's easy to not take the responsibility sometimes and be like, let go, let God, I'm sorry, repent and move on. Yeah. And now you are responsible for yourself and your own actions.
I would agree with that. I engaged in more antisocial behaviors while I was in the church, lying and cheating and whatever, than I do outside of it. And I have no interest in it outside of it. It's like I found a firmer ground to stand on. We got to step back a little bit, though, because you did mention something which you and I talked about before we started today, but no one else has heard here on the podcast, in talking about your son passing. How long has it been since your son passed?
2009. It's similar to Down syndrome. It's trisomy 18. Down syndrome, I believe, is trisomy 13. It's a chromosomal disorder in birth, and trisomy 18 pretty much almost guarantees fatality. Yes, the number of babies that survive is very low, and even those that do survive, it's almost, those that survive past 1 year can probably be counted on your hand, most likely, or something. There's very few, and we had decided to carry to term. You had this small hope of whatever miracle. You had this small hope that maybe you at least get a chance to hear him cry. On Christmas Eve, she went into labor at the church service, at the Christmas Eve church service. And then he was stillborn on Christmas Day. Back in 2009. And so that is obviously a tough journey for anybody. And there's lots of different lessons that come out of that one. But yeah, it was tough to kind of accept that approach, because also the other issue was trisomy 18 is not it's not hereditary. It's not because I ate too much steak before we, conceived. It wasn't because of anything we did. There's no really good explanation for it. And that was one of the questions at the time where I was like, okay, so if we're a perfect design, if we're like, there's no explanation for this, and maybe scientifically we'll find something one day, but then that's just a bad design flaw. And you start hearing these, well, God just wanted to see him sooner. I'm like, well, that's many choice words. That's not good. How is that loving? Or, God had a plan. He's trying to teach you something, so he's going to make my kid suffer to teach me something. I don't think God knows me as well as he thinks he knows me. And so the lessons there, watching how different people reacted to it, was another piece. That the worst one was when someone told me, well, there's somebody that can relate to you. And I knew exactly where he was going with it. And he said, God lost his son. I'm like, nope. God chose to lose his son and even had 33 years with him, and then woke him up after 3 days. Like, not the same comparison. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, it didn't help with bringing me back into the fold by some of the reactions of the church. But yeah, that was definitely, you know, he would have been, I guess, 14 uh, come this December.
Yeah.
Uh, so, but that journey was also, you dealt with the fact that not too long after that we had our son, which the guilt of it comes back to the fact that, like, had Aiden been born, Liam would not have. So now as a father, I had to fight back and forth with the feelings of, like, I wanted Aiden to survive, but if he did, I wouldn't have Liam, who I
Mm-hmm.
love very much. If I had Liam, I can't have Aiden. Like, you're pulled back and forth on that.
Yeah, it kind of sends you into your own existential piece of trying to figure out exactly where to put your
Yeah,
focus at and being able to heal and grieve in a way that's healthy and not taking it out on those that are closest to you.
right. And I wasn't getting the comfort from the church that I should have. There
Mm-hmm.
were some members. There were some wonderful, wonderful members. For those out there, the tips I would give you is, anybody who's experiencing loss, just say, "Hey, I'm here," and then sit with them. Let
Mm-hmm.
them tell you what they need. Or if you have to do something that they don't even know you did. And it just like, we had a group of guys show up, do my yard, and leave. They never knocked on the door. They never
Mm-hmm.
said anything to me. It wasn't about them. It was about us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when people start, you know, kind of going overboard with thoughts and prayers, making sure they're seen when they give you the whatever, it's becoming about them and less about the grief and the help. So that's, at least that's,
Yeah.
everybody agrees differently. Some people like that stuff, but for me personally, those are the things that I would suggest.
Well, I know it's been some time, but of course, Daniel, I'm sorry to hear that you went through that. I can relate to some degree. My first child was a miscarriage, and so
I'm sorry.
it was kind of that same process. And I didn't
Right,
read about it for a long time. Like, I didn't even like recognize it. I tried to just push it aside, and
right.
I wasn't deconstructing when that occurred. In fact, I didn't deconstruct for probably, I don't know, 5 years after that. So it wasn't something that was during the course of that. If you don't mind, I know you're very well spoken, so I'd like to ask you some difficult questions around that,
Sure.
because I know this is what Christians are probably talking to you, saying a lot about, and they probably use you as an example to try to push their own narrative around this.
Of course.
Was your child passing happen during your deconstruction, or was it preemptive to that?
Let's see, 2009. It was it was probably towards, I had not really decided to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I had some questions, but I was still rationalizing things. Like, since my wife was so progressive, she did have, I mean, she did actually help me with some of the ideas of,
Yeah.
or help. Like I said, she didn't give me the ideas, but talking with her, um, I was able to still kind of rationalize still being in the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that particular church was very wonderful. And like the children's ministers and stuff were friends of ours that we had gone to school with. And so at the time, I think it was towards kind of the beginning of my deconstruction, because my daughter was still young. I think more of the deconstruction came even more after that, when Liam was born.
Okay.
And so that's the piece where it kind of all adds up, as being a father
Yeah.
of the two that did survive and a father of one that didn't, and adding up, like, hey, this is not how a good loving father who has the power to take care of these things should act.
Yeah, not to mention you're in a position to then explain to your other children about this loss and what that
Right.
means and why things occur in a particular way. So my next question is probably the more difficult one: is how do you respond to those that say something along the lines of, well, you're angry at the church, or you're angry at God, or you're, the church people led you away, but they're maybe not a good representation of God,
uh,
and using that type of thing as saying this loss is what turned your heart bitter or turned it cold. How do you respond to those types of claims?
I mean, they can choose to believe that. For me, if that's fine, that if that makes them feel better.
Mm-hmm.
The sheer fact that I was approaching my deconstruction attempts to prove he was real,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to using those moments as the catalyst for them. And yet I still ended up on the other side, should speak volumes.
Yeah.
I can't be mad at a God who I don't believe exists.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the fact that I was actually in a loving and caring church that I completely support, because that's the issue with a lot of what you say. They'll say, "Oh, the church, you had this bad experience and stuff." That's quite the opposite. I had an incredible experience. The mission I grew up in was wonderful. The church I was in when stuff with Aiden happened was wonderful, and so forth and so on. Like the Christians around me were good people,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's nothing to prove that it was the church that caused me to leave.
Yeah. So some of the responses during your loss may not have been presented in the best way, but that wasn't your ultimate decision
Right.
in stepping outside of the faith.
Honestly, that loss had more impact on my relationship with my wife than it did anything.
Yeah.
Because it's a lesson I learned from it, because when you have a loss like that, actually when you have any loss, honestly, when you have any loss, but especially a loss of that size, we all deal with that grief in a different way and on a different timetable.
Yeah.
And when you're in a relationship with anybody and y'all aren't grieving at the same time or in the same way, that causes a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you finally heal, or the other person finally heals, and you're not healed, sometimes that can cause this kind of resentment of like, why aren't you still hurting?
Yeah.
Like, why am I still hurting, but you're not? And you feel lonely, even though this is your person,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not the other person's fault. It's not your fault. And in that moment, it's hard to see that because you expect them to be there with you. And so in that moment, it's hard to see that. In retrospect and looking back, I can see that and be like, yeah, that's something I can tell people who are going through it. That you that's why I hate this whole saying of two halves make a whole that people say for marriage. I hate that saying. I personally think it should be two holes make a couple.
I like that.
Like, you should not be getting into it to fix the other person or to get fixed.
Right.
And that's where I'm married again, and we call it an easy love now.
Yeah.
It's something that we don't have to fight for. It's something that we recognize that we do go through things differently, but we take care of our own, self for the most part. We're always there for the other person if needs be, but we help each other grow rather than try to fix each other.
Yeah, my wife and I have a similar relationship. We are a whole part that is supporting the other one in their personal journey. And whenever you call on me, I'm there to support you. But
exactly.
I love your weaknesses. I love your strengths. I love that you're human. And when you need me to come in and be that support, I'll be that support. But we are our own people. We support each other being our own people.
Exactly. Yeah, but that's when you have those other losses. It's like, and you've been brought up in the church where that's a common saying: two halves make a whole. Da, 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 yeah. And I know it's kind of a flippant saying, but even those small things make people kind of, it primes them for a certain thought, and it causes problems.
So I want to propose something in just what you've shared, because this isn't the first time I've heard a testimony similar to yours and other ones even that are the inverse of that. Oftentimes we see individuals, especially in their adult lives, come to God because of hitting what I would, in the psych field, we call rock bottom. They've had an issue with addiction. They've had a major divorce or breakup. They have essentially been placed into a position where they've had to challenge the beliefs that they've carried throughout their entire life and re-examine them and do some introspection to figure out what's true for them and what's not true for them. And sometimes we see young adults move into religion because of those types of experiences. On the other side of that, we see individuals that are fully raised in the church with a belief system that experience a series of heartaches that bring them to a place to then have to re-examine their beliefs and re-examine their identity and re-examine, how they want to move forward on that. And I'm not saying that either way is right, wrong, or otherwise. I'm more proposing that when you hit a place where your reality is not matching your internal belief system, you're going to do introspection and you're going to challenge those beliefs, and it causes a deconstruction, whether it's a deconstruction of secular ideas or a deconstruction of religious ideas. And oftentimes you just see the inverse for atheists that were raised religious. They hit hardship and they go, wait a minute, this isn't working. And they step back and start examining at it through the lens of a microscope. And I find that interesting. I'm just curious, do you think that is something that you see among other individuals where they're just being tested with life examples that don't match their theology, and that's why they go, wait a minute, this belief system isn't actually working. There's something going on here.
I mean, we're seeing it more and more, and I don't know if it's just because it's more, the algorithm's showing it to us.
Yeah.
Welcome to the world of social media, right? But I'm also seeing the reverse, where in so many cases it just strengthens their faith. Mm-hmm. People seem to need something to hold on to, especially when they go through hardship. Mm-hmm. And I don't begrudge them for that. I understand wanting to have something to anchor onto, and especially with the state of mental health in this country, in this world. Even the medical help that is provided, like how difficult it is to get a good therapist or be able to afford one and stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't blame people for feeling like they need to grasp onto something else, to some greater being, and rationalize it because it gives them some sort of comfort. Mm-hmm. But that goes back to the whole versus the half thing we were saying. If more people were able to work on themselves and get to a place where they can look at it critically or analyze or whatever, I'm pretty sure the church would be surprised how quickly things would change. But so many are not offered that. And when they go to work on themselves, they're then led to a pastor or a leader who isn't trained, who is not a trained therapist, isn't licensed, doesn't. All of their therapy is based on this book. And so they're obviously going to guide them in that direction, and in many cases not actually help them heal.
And if I may also just interject, I want to just kick at the air so hard right now. They also do not hold to a code of ethics, and they're not reviewed or administered over by a board of individuals to question those code of ethics in their therapeutic practices, which as a therapist myself is always an issue to me. It's like there's no over-governing board to recognize whether or not they should keep a license to minister or to preach or to provide counseling services when they cross a line that does not fit a specific code of ethics to honor the individual.
Right. Well, even in using their beliefs, sometimes it's harmful. Mm-hmm. Like when they lean on, for example, the commandment of honor thy father and mother, that father and mother could very well be abusing that child, but then be told that, well, they just need to trust that the parents doing it for their own good or whatever. Mm-hmm. Because, well, you got to honor your father and mother. And I've heard this story over and over again on the channel with people who come up and talk on the live and tell their story to others. Yeah. Many of them for the first time. And those type of things, yeah, that's part of their belief. But obviously, when you look at it rationally, doesn't make sense. People have been condemned for trying to speak out against their parent who is abusive, rather than paying attention to the victim.
Yeah. I think that's an overall...
It's baffling. It's baffling.
It is. I think it's an overall concern in just the way that we approach society in general, especially in the West. And I think that it's very much endorsed by the church. I actually made a post about this on LinkedIn, I think 2 days ago, about how we set up systems to respect authority based on hierarchy instead of based on leadership. And this goes back to your testimony in the beginning about what took you into your deconstruction was recognizing that as a father, you have a job and a role to be a leader, to be a guide, to be a support, to be a mentor, not just to be the head of the household because you hold a hierarchical position. There is a lot of responsibility that goes into doing that. And the church does not support that belief system that, God should have leadership qualities if he wants to be worshipped. They think that he should be worshipped just because he has the hierarchy.
Oh yeah, the rationalization for things like slavery and the genocide and the infanticide and stuff like that is the mental gymnastics. And you know the answer 9 times out of 10. It's, well, he's God. He has the right to do it. He brought us into the. It's that old. Bill
Yeah.
Cosby used to say it in his comedy routine.
Yep.
He's like, "I brought you into this world. I can take you out," sort of mentality. And yeah, that sounds like a horrendous God to me.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a petty God to me.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just oh god, the mental gymnastics just
I know.
I can only laugh at it now.
Yeah, I call them allowances because the church was very good at having me make allowances for atrocities in the
That's
Bible,
fair.
and
So,
it's mental gymnastics is what it is. And I consider myself a pretty firm atheist. I don't identify as an agnostic atheist. I mean, in all truth, I am agnostic because you can't absolutely know, but I'm
right.
sure enough that I can consider myself an atheist. But if God were to come down and present himself to me, and I tell theists this all the time, I would then believe he exists. But if I show him the Bible and I say, "But are you this guy?" I still wouldn't worship him, even if he did exist. Like
Right.
that still would go against my morality based on what I believe, and I would be perfectly happy, being punished for not worshiping him if he were that God. Now, if he were to say, "No, that's
Right.
rubbish. That's not me at all. That's just what people wrote about me," then we can have a conversation.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I had a guest come on my live once a while back and claim to be God.
Oh,
and
nice.
and she, well, it was in the form of a female.
Okay.
So this is where we know she's lying, of course. No, I'm just kidding. But she claimed she was only in that vessel temporarily and spoke human, not English, human.
Mm-hmm.
But just so you know, when I asked her, "Hey, did you do these things that the Bible claims?" She says, "No, those are stories of humans." So be rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, apparently this particular God who showed up on my live does not claim responsibility for the flood and the genocide and stuff like that. So,
That
hey,
is
who
good
knows?
to know.
Good to know.
Was she still omnipotent,
Um,
and omniscient, and all power?
pretty much, but unfortunately, she left before we could finish the conversation.
Oh.
Which I shortly after that on the same live got a guy who came up who claimed to be God's homie.
Oh.
And that was the term he used. He said, "God does not have many close friends, but I am his homie." And I was like, okay. And so I did for any of your older audience, if y'all remember in Living Color,
Mm-hmm.
I did work into the conversation and asked some questions that led up to certain things and was able to work in the phrase, "So homie don't play that?" Yes. It's from Homie the Clown from Living.
As I said, you have some amazing tenacity and patience to do the lives that you do and continuously interview people. I'm always a little reluctant to bring folks on live with me because I never know where the conversation is going to go. And I really don't like arguing with apologists or debating apologists because they're very well educated in how to word conversations and phrase questions to support their presumptions that they learn in their Bible schools. And so it's like, I don't really want to have a conversation with you about it because we're not going to get anywhere in those conversations.
Right.
But you do an amazing job of just bringing people on and demonstrating that patience with them.
Well, and that's the thing is like, it really comes down to like, what usually trips them up is the sheer fact that I've actually had so many different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
That I can almost apply something in the real world to what they're arguing, and then they don't have an answer for it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, but the biggest key is with my platform, unlike a lot of the different deconstruction platforms out there. For one, I use deconstruction in a more broad sense. Normally on TikTok, when you hear that, it's leaving the faith. For me, deconstruction could be like getting out of alcoholism. You're deconstructing one thing going into another. But in talking to them, I will set these boundaries because like people don't believe there can be a real safe space on TikTok, but that's actually what I build. Mm-hmm. If the person can't give an honest answer, if the person avoids the answers and anything along those lines and can't have a genuine conversation, they get booted, period. Mm-hmm. It's that simple. if they just are there to spout and repeat the scripts that we all know, even the really well educated ones. Because the thing I'll approach with them is, okay, great, you have an IQ of 3,000. Congratulations. But does that mean like the scripture's only accessible to you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jesus wasn't going to the smart people; he was going to the common man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so is it supposed to be accessible? And if they say anything other than yes, then either way, I honestly own it at that point, because if it is, but you have to do philosophical gymnastics to get to it, then it's not accessible. It's not accessible.
If you have to have an entire board of individuals to explain to you the verse and break it down into 5 different languages, then what's the point? I always say that too. Like, why, if there was a God, why would he wait so many thousands, in my mind, hundreds of thousands of years into human evolution,
right?
Thousands of years from the Christian perspective, to present a truth or to present this information and have it written down, when he could have waited until an age of TikTok and iPhones and what have you, and just present something that we could all get right then and there up front. That would be.
I want to see God doing trendy TikTok dances.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I want to see.
Like, you could have waited until the time of social media, when everyone could have heard your word immediately if you click up a button, instead of having folks write it down forever and ever. And even then, if we were to take the biblical view, why would you wait so many thousands of years to send your son for a sacrifice? Why not just walk out of the Garden of Eden and do it when you got on the other side of the gate? Boom, done. Now we have that truth from there on out. It doesn't make any sense. And that's
write a sequel.
Yeah,
write a sequel. Yeah, we're in the age of remakes, right? We got The Little Mermaid. We got all sorts of other stuff with remakes. Come on,
we need a New Testament.
New Testament. Hire James Gunn to tell the story. Add some humor to it. I don't know, just something. Come on.
Yeah. But that's usually one of my biggest arguments whenever we look at the Bible specifically and people try to assert it as being truth. I can find 1,000 humans that can write a better testament.
Hey, even with the ark, with the flood story, I always ask him, like, why did he have to, kill all the animals? Why did he have to kill everybody? Couldn't have he also found a more humane way to do it, like Thanos, like snap them and dust. I mean, you created us from dust, right? So why not just send them back to dust?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to being inhumane.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not also mention that he failed at getting rid of evil, because as soon as they got off the boat, we got daughters, getting their dad drunk just so they can start repopulating. It's just a wild thing, but obviously they do the gymnastics to kind of justify some of that, and not just. I get it. It makes them uncomfortable to try to think there's nothing out there, or it makes them uncomfortable to just say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple. Like, it's okay to say, I don't know.
For me, it comes back down to the point that a lot of them have this theology so interwoven in their identity, it's really hard to let go of it. It literally defines who they are, because they were indoctrinated so young into believing in it, which is why individuals like yourself, Daniel, are so fascinating to me, because you were very much like plug and played into the system, and you found your way out of that system again, and was able to educate yourself and find information and then be able to come out and educate others on what you found.
And, it's not even 100% the educating others. It's more people want to be heard, and people want to feel like they're not alone. And for some people, that's what religion gives them, that feeling of not being alone. For others, it doesn't, but they still need a place to land. And that's primarily what I try to give them. I started this mess only because I felt alone in those 10 years. My wife now is born into a family. They're Jewish, but she's not practicing. I know the Torah better than she does. And shoot, even when I talk about certain even big stories like Noah and stuff, she's still kind of like, I don't quite know that one. I'm like, okay, well, but having no community is the main reason why I started it. And now, like I said, I thought I was going to get 50, maybe 100. Now we're talking about, like, I'm not huge still, but I have to give credit to the Chaotic crew, because they're loyal and they're caring, and we send out the bat signal when somebody's hurting. And that's what we call it. They'll send out the bat signal. If I need to get involved, somebody messages me directly, gets me out of bed, I get involved, and so it's this whole community of people that includes Christians. We have a nun in our group. One of the t-shirts we sell is the most popular shirt is the nun t-shirt, and it's a sexy nun t-shirt. Thoughts and prayers, THOTS, thoughts and prayers. And she loves it. She thinks it's hysterical. But like, that's the community. We have people, like, it doesn't matter what they're going through. They're willing to actually just be there for each other. And that's what it's about.
Well, it's definitely a message that I can get behind. Being there for other people, give them a place to be heard. And I'll tell you that through a couple of decades of doing therapy and working with people and being a life coach, this is what I have found as being the primary issue in almost every case. Even couples therapy or individual therapy, It was just they weren't being heard. The other person wasn't hearing what they were saying. They were retorting. They were pushing back against. They were arguing. They were debating.
Right.
They weren't just saying, I hear you. And it didn't matter if they agreed or not. It was literally somebody just saying, I may not agree with you, but I hear you. I hear the words you're saying. I understand where you're coming from. And we may not be on the same page, but I acknowledge that what you're saying is meaningful.
That's the piece. Yeah, that's the piece that it kind of disarms a lot of the debaters that come in. Is because I'll tell them, I'm like, you know what? I support your choice in that. I will not invalidate your journey. If you saw that miracle, congratulations. If that's what convinced you, I can't speak for it. I have a hard time believing it, and that's okay. But if that makes you a better person, great. Now, if you're following that and it makes you a horrible person, then we need to talk. But if that's giving you something and you're healthy in that process and that belief, then wonderful. I will back them 100%. And oftentimes that disarms them because they think we're all just on there. You obviously, I'm sure you get the commenters that come in and be like, why are you only hating on Christianity? Like, we haven't even talked about it yet. Like, or immediately, coming in and being like, oh, you're just the Antichrist. 1 John 2:19, you were never an ex-Christian, stuff like that. You get the immediate hate. We have proven trolls who have admitted to me now they came in to troll to get a reaction, and they now are followers because they're just like, wait, what's happening? This isn't. I'm not getting the reaction I thought I was going to get. Like that. It's fun. I think it's an incredible experience, and I have to give kudos to the community for helping me with that.
Well, I appreciate that you were out there building a community. It's been amazing seeing you grow, and I think that very soon you'll probably be one of the biggest atheist platforms out there on TikTok if you can handle it. It's a lot to manage, and getting the community large. I'm glad you have support in doing that.
I hope so. And that's the piece, is that I am grateful for you, for others who have any that came before me, folks like Daniel Green, he's I don't know if you've come across him, Australian guy. He's so well spoken, so well educated, but he was one of the ones that inspired how I would do my approach, because he's just so kind. He can speak more eloquently than I can, but man, we joke he's the debate part, and then he sends them to me for therapy. So it's great, and I appreciate you saying that. I hope I do. What my community were talking about, wanting to make this a more permanent thing, since this is something that we know people need. It's a long road to try to make it a permanent thing. I'd love to get out of my job and do this permanently, but man, it is a long road for that. But I appreciate that you see that we have that potential.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think that it's what's needed, and I think it's really the path forward to kind of help us have this more, message of really just religious freedom and having people be accepted for whatever they believe. And I have the same message that I tell Christians many times. I don't mind that you believe in Christianity. Like my content frequently is not for you. I'm creating content for those that need another place to belong, for those that have deconstructed it, that can't believe it, that don't know what path to take. That's why my content is there. I'm not trying to just completely break down everything you think and everything you believe every moment of my day. I'm trying to give other people a path towards spiritual healing.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I really just, again, it still just baffles me that they want to attack first and ask questions later. It's like going into someone's house that you've never met. Like your friend invites you to one of their friends' house, and the first thing you walk in and do is be like, "Well, that couch just doesn't look nice." You haven't even said hi and here's my name and what's your name. You're now going in and insulting immediately.
Yeah, it is a very human response, though. It speaks back to our
It
tribalistic nature. Like, I get it, but it doesn't mean that I don't have a terrible response sometimes when you come in and judge my couch.
Well, the fun part is I've actually tried to. I've told them, I'm like, you're talking to a missionary kid whose family has done this for decades, and we're good at it. Like, we are responsible for bringing a lot of people into the church. Like, we were so well known in that community that, like, I was doing work in Kenya once, and we're out in a village. Some random couple walks up to me and is like, "Oh, you're so and so son," and it's like, yeah. It's like, yeah, we knew you when you were this big. Like, so this is in the middle. Like, I had no clue they were there. So it's a different world.
Yeah.
But I do know that some of my content can sometimes be abrasive. What message is missed? So my videos are a little more abrasive than my life sometimes. But what they often miss is that you, I'm sure, do it as well. When I do that and it's more abrasive, it's not towards those loving Christians, and they know that.
No,
it is towards the toxic ones.
Yeah.
Right. It's the toxic ones.
Yeah.
So the ones that just, I mean, I've got some lady named Stigmata of God who believes she's a prophet, and the whole Stigmata thing, that posts videos of her proof of her visions. And I'm like, those are just lens flares like Michael Bay does. And, bad boys,
No, like I said, I think that our strategy is very much the same. I know that some of my videos come across as being abrasive, and sometimes I will lump together Christians when I speak about them on those abrasive videos. But in individual conversations, when you're having a table talk, it is compassion, it is caring, it is love, it is grace. It's meeting them where they're at and having a very genuine conversation about where they want to go with absolute respect. And I kind of bring it back to, I've seen multiple articles about this, about there are certain types of techniques and tactics that snap people out of that tunnel vision that they have. And that's what those abrasive videos are about. It's to kind of snap you out of it for a moment and think about things differently. It's not to be hateful. It's not to attack people. It's just to hopefully turn on those ears to listen a little bit closer to the other things that I say and come and join my live and get the real experience.
Well, in some cases, I won't lie, some of mine is a little bit more abrasive in the sense of drawing a boundary. And that is because I have a responsibility to my community, because it's a healing space, because it's a space where people are supposed to be able to kind of have that. I used to have on my backgrounds on my live that said safe space for all. I had to change that because I had to kind of realize it's not if you don't participate. And I will stand. I will place. They call it spicy dad. I will be spicy dad if you are going to come into my house and do things that are going to trigger, like these responses from people who are trying to heal, trigger anger and other things. I'm like, no, this isn't. We'll put you in timeout with a little, 30-second mute or something. If you come back with the same energy, you're gone.
No, I 100% support that. I actually had this conversation the other day through my comments. I told you guys that you're being bigoted, you're being divisive. I was like, and you are not welcome on my channel until you're able to come back and have an inclusive mindset and have speech that is respectful of others. And if you can't do that, you're not welcome here. You're not welcome as part of this community.
Right.
Yeah.
I go so far as actually blocking some. Yeah. I will go not just mute, not just tell them they're not welcome. I'll go so far as blocking. Because of that, we've had to deal with wolves in sheep's clothing. We've had to deal with some Christians who come in claiming they're open-minded, they're just trying to preach in a more subtle way. But we've also seen some really, like, some of the Christian community that has stayed with us will go on those abrasive TikTok videos and defend me. And then they're called not Christian. They're called, like, having a nun go up against some people is one of the funniest things. And watching those people be like, well, then you're not really Christian. I'm like, well, if she's not, there's no hope for the rest of us, It's like, but it is fun to see the change. And for those that I hear oftentimes saying that there is no way to change them, there's no way to be Christian and allow them. Like, we have one girl named Rachel who is a Christian, and this is a perfect example of how change can happen. We had another member who had their husband go into the hospital, and we sent out the bat signal and said, "Hey guys, just go show her some love. Don't make it a big deal. Just go show her some love on her post." And this woman who's a Christian went over there, and instead of saying, "Hey, you're in my thoughts and prayers," as is typically done, she knew that she was an atheist. And she said, "Hey, you're in my thoughts. If we're here, if there's anything you need, let us know," and left it at that. That simple gesture of putting aside their own belief for a second, and yeah, she's probably going to pray for her in private, whatever. I expect that. But the fact that she recognized, hey, this is somebody who's an atheist, it's not going to help me to say thoughts and prayers. In fact, it might have an opposite effect. But to just say, I'm here are my thoughts, period, to me showed a lot of growth for bridging that gap.
Yeah. That's absolutely beautiful, Daniel. I know we've reached our time boundary. I appreciate you staying on a little bit longer. Can you let folks know where they can find you, where they connect with you and become part of your community?
Yeah, by all means. I appreciate you having me on. Like I told you earlier, I'll talk all day long. I spend, for those who don't know, as a chaotic dad on TikTok, and I spend a good bit of time during the workday. I work remote, so I'm able to do both, running lives from the East Coast. So the 9 to 5, I'm not on 9 to 5, but that's in there is the period of time that I tend to run live. We also have a second channel where Eric runs at night called Chaotic After Dark, where he allows a little more debate. But on my channel, it's about the healing. It's about how we will have debate style discussions, but it's more discussion than debate. So yeah, Chaotic Dad, and on TikTok for right now. Hopefully we'll be getting some other social media stuff running as well. I don't know if I can give the shameless plug for the store, but
yeah, absolutely.
It's chaoticsafespace.com is, if you want to see that the thoughts and prayers shirt that's so popular, that's it right there. So chaoticsafespace.com. But no, anybody who comes, we're here to basically help with any sort of journey. We've talked to at least two people down from suicidal thoughts. We've talked to people who've been sexually assaulted by their pastor father. And the list goes on, unfortunately. And so we've been able to connect a lot of people. So yeah, everybody's welcome. Again, takes two to tango. So if you want to participate. If you're there to troll, you're going to get spicy daddy. Daddy's going to put you in the corner.
All right, Daniel, I appreciate you coming on here again, and I appreciate the work that you are out there doing with these individuals. It's nice to know that there is just individuals out there that are helping others deconstruct, being able to find their own path, and then living a life that is meaningful to them. And thanks to all of you guys for joining us here again on Gods of Tomorrow. Please go out there and do something that your future self is going to be thankful for. Do something to treat yourself, take care of yourself, and be the best version of yourself at any possible moment. I know it's a challenge, but it is possible if you may have the mindset for it. And as always, as we say here on Gods of Tomorrow, do what the fuck you will.
Love it.